Instagram is like a thirst trap for coaching. Part of the challenge with coaching is it's largely a Western consumerist, like I'll help you kick ass and achieve goals sort of space. I can't tell you how many clients have come to me and said, Max, you're going to be great for me because I just need someone to hold me accountable. And I'll say, well, don't you think the conversation that we need to be having is how come you feel you need someone to hold you accountable in the first place?
Clever Crew. Today's guest is Max Stevens, personal development coach, speaker, and author of What the Fuck Do You Really Want? He works with high-performing entrepreneurs and execs who've done all the right things, but still feel like something's missing. If you've ever looked around at your life, you've been checking all the boxes, and you still feel like it's just not clicking, today's episode's for you. So this one is diving deep. Max, very excited to have you here. Candace and I are stoked. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I was looking forward to speaking with you both.
So when this email came across our inbox, we were like, this is right up the Clever Crew's alley.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us are people with a long list of goals. We are maybe never satisfied because we're always looking for the next thing. I could definitely say that for myself, right? Every time I hit a goal, I'm like, okay, but now what can I do? If I did that, what's next? And I don't take the time to pause and celebrate and really reflect on how I got here because I'm always chasing the next thing. It sounds like you work with people like me, Max. So how did you kind of get into this business? How did you get into this lane? What brought you here?
Yeah, good question. So I was lucky / unfortunate that I grew up in a drug addicted household. And so that will turn anyone into a practical psychologist pretty quickly in terms of
I feel like there's only one or two ways.
Yeah, you go one or two.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've raised such a great point. Like if you look at any studies around the children of addicts, normally what happens for them is that they will internalize a belief that they aren't lovable, because if my dad had really loved me, then he would have been able to get healthy. And because he wasn't able to do that, like in this case, it was my dad, I must not be lovable. So I must not be worthy. And so normally, children in those situations will go in one of two directions, where they'll seek out confirmation of that belief, and normally either won't amount to much or will in some ways be self-destructive in some sense, because they are sort of seeking out the confirmation of that belief, or they will work very, very hard to work against that belief and seek contrary evidence to that belief. And I was just lucky that I fell into the second category. And so, but the thing that I was observing in my life was invariably, no matter what I had achieved, that sort of rumbling of disquiet had never left me. It always stayed with me and invariably returned, which that then moved me into, forgive me, I've told the story before, but that eventually moved me to India. I went there when I was 17 or thereabouts, and I remember I was walking through the sort of slum area in where I was staying, and there was a guy who was sitting on the side of the road, who was sitting in like a meditative sort of position, who was clearly homeless and clearly quite malnourished, and he was crying. And I stopped and said, "Oh, sir, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to, sorry, I didn't mean to bother you. I saw you were crying. Are you okay?" And he looked up at me and he said, "Oh yeah, no, I'm completely fine." And I said, "Oh wow, you speak like perfect English," because the area that I was in, I was sort of like the only sort of famous white person there. And he looked up at me and he said, "Yeah, no, I'm fine." And I said, "Oh, I just wanted to check. I saw that you were crying." He said, "Oh no, these are happy tears." And I said, "Oh, that's great." I said, "Did you get good news, or like what happened?" And he said, "No, not really." And I said, "So why are you so happy?" And he said, "Because I am."
Mm-hmm.
And that never left me. That got me very curious, because even at 17, I thought to myself, I already have more, whatever that means, like, than he ever will. And yet he's happier than I'll ever be. And I thought there's something profoundly wrong about the way that I'm going about my pursuit of happiness, so to speak. And so that then moved me into the personal development sort of space around meditation. And I started to, over time, just gradually lose interest in my external reality and became more and more interested in my internal reality. And that was sort of like how my journey started, I suppose.
That's an amazing story.
There's so many nuggets in there. And just the one thing that I would love to say is thank you for being very open about it and very honest. I think there's so much shame and guilt around people who grow up in homes like that or who are in, struggling times. They don't want to talk about it. And I love that you're talking about it. And the gentleman's response and just saying, because I am, Candace and I say often, when our clients tell us, well, when we're ready, we'll do that. And we're like, look, ready, like ready is a decision, take action and you'll be ready as you do it. Like waiting for permission from wherever is just a waste of time. Permission to be happy, permission to be successful, permission, insert here. We love handing out permission slips at Not Nice Clever. So Max, I think you already handed out a few to the Clever crew. So one thing that you've said online, and I love this too, is that a lot of coaching today, especially in the era of Instagram and social media, that it's broken. Coaching is broken.
Oh, yeah.
And so
definitely.
That's a very bold statement. I'm curious about the statement. I do agree with you to some extent, and I'd love to hear, what does that mean? What have you seen? When was your like throwing in the towel, I'm going to do it differently type of moment for you?
Okay, so why do I make that statement? So there's a lot of systemic. It's not, by the way, everything that I'm about to lay out is not like someone's fault. It's just the sort of nature, systemic nature of the industry. Yeah. So there's a lot of systemic problems within the industry. So number one is obviously like barrier to entry is like incredibly low, and so because of that, normally what we have is a lot of highly like unqualified people like moving into that space. And like even to what you just said around like there's Instagram is like a thirst trap for coaching, and but more importantly, I would argue that even if you look at the etymology, like so as in like the history of the word coach, it actually means to carry. So I will carry you while you work out what you need to do for yourself. And so when we look at what brings somebody to coaching in the first place, invariably what they're seeking is better outcomes, right? They want a better outcome in their business, a better outcome for their relationship, a better outcome in their health, a better outcome in their relationship with themselves, whatever, right? Outcomes are driven by behavior, right? So the behavior that we engage in produces those outcomes. Behavior is driven by decisions. So like to your point before, what do we decide to do? Decisions are driven by thinking, as in what is the state of our sort of psychological architecture at any given point in time. And thinking is driven by our worldview. And the challenge for human beings is that our worldview, by its very nature, is invisible to us. And so the problem within the coaching industry, part of the reason that I say it's broken, is because human beings and coaches misdiagnose problems as being something that exists inside as being something that exists in the external world rather than being something that is happening within me. And so like coaching 101 in my view is that whatever somebody brings to coaching is never the problem. So like I can remember one of my first clients ever, like was a really high level executive, very, very effective human being who came to me to want to work on time management. And I said, sure. And I said, show me your calendar and let's start pulling it apart. And he went on to explain that he was working something in the neighborhood of 16 to 17-hour days. And I said, wow, it's like a miracle that you're even here for this session at all. And he said, yeah, no, I made a commitment to you and, blah, blah, blah. And I said, so what's going on? I said, is it like you've struggled to delegate? You can't say no. There's something about how your role is structured that is leading to these outcomes, like what's going on? And he sort of danced around it and I kept like pressing him and saying like tell me, like what, like it's all right, like you're safe. And he kept dancing around it and like 11, 12 minutes later he sort of like looked down and looked back up at me and he said, I really, really, really don't want to divorce my wife, but I'm thinking I might have to. And I said, right. And so what invariably came to the surface was the reason that he was working so much was because he knew that if he was home long enough, then certain conversations would surface that he didn't want to have. And so, like, it's, in my view, it's just, and I said, okay, look, we can have conversations about time management if you'd like, but I don't think that's the conversation we need to be having. And so, part of the challenge with coaching is it's largely a Western consumerist, like, I'll help you kick ass and achieve goals sort of space. But the problem is, like even for example, when people, I can't tell you how many clients have come to me and said, Max, you're going to be great for me because I just need someone to hold me accountable. And I'll say, well, don't you think the conversation that we need to be having is how come you feel you need someone to hold you accountable in the first place? Because then you don't need me at all. And so I guess the point in some ways is, like, coaching, in my view, it's not upstream enough. It doesn't actually look at our epistemology, our sense making, our worldview. And by and large, the other huge, like, problem, certainly as I see it, is that coaches, certainly as I have observed it, are largely ex-corporates who have been burnt out in their own careers, who are now trying to build a lifestyle business for themselves rather than actually building something in the service of somebody else. And so they'll charge, like, majorly disproportionate fees for very little time and very low touch points, knowing that they only need 4 or 5 clients a quarter, because then I can sort of subsidize my own income that I was making in corporate. And that's like, and so there are a lot of, again, that's not someone's fault, right? It's just like there's a lot of systemic issues that sort of show up. But those would be the two biggest ones for me. It's like, number one is that it doesn't even begin to deal with, and by the way, I would argue it doesn't even begin to deal with these things because coaches themselves aren't even aware of that, like around how far upstream problems can go. And then the second is that the coaches are often trying to build a business for themselves rather than trying to build it around what their clients need. So that's sort of my first draft approximation of it, certainly.
One of the things that I saw when I was doing a little research about you online was you talked about how your perception of yourself determines what's possible.
Yes,
and
that's true.
it sounds like if people don't perceive themselves to be able to hold themselves accountable, then they are not able to then maybe reach their goal. What do you mean when you say that? Tell me more about how someone's perception determines what's possible.
Well, again, like, it sits largely within that sort of thinking driven by worldview, right? So, like, one of the things that I've said to rather disagreeable CEOs that I've worked with in the past is I'll say, right, so you're a CEO. You can probably see really easily on your team that people are their own worst problem. And they'll go, oh, yeah, definitely. I can definitely see that. And I say, right, you can see that they get in their own way in some way or, something to that effect. Oh, yeah, definitely, definitely. And then I'll say, right. And when you look throughout human history and you see all of the crazy, what that we've done to each other throughout, centuries, and we can see that people really believe that they were doing good, but were actually causing a lot of harm. We can see that they have been self-deceived in some way, right? And he'll go, oh, yeah, definitely, definitely. And I'll say, right. And then let's bring this closer to home. When you look at your own family, you look at your parents, you look at your kids, you look at your spouse, your husband, wife, etc. Like, can you see that they get in their own way in some way? And they'll go, oh, yeah, definitely, definitely. I'll say, right, but not you. I'll say, how'd you get so lucky that you were the only person who was transparent to themselves? And so this is the problem for most, certainly, if you guys are doing a lot of work with, business owners and execs, etc., is like business owners misdiagnose problems as being something in the external world. Like, no, Max, you don't understand. My problem is that I don't have enough leads. And I'll say, no, that's so not the problem. Like, your problem, like the chokehold of any business, right, is your personal psychology. Because if you're the key decision maker, all of those decisions have to get funneled through your personal development. And so we can always, like, you can see it in terms of how businesses are run, that they are run in the fashion of the personal development of the core decision maker, right? And so one's perception of themselves right, invariably flows downstream to their team. It flows downstream to their outcomes. It flows downstream to their revenue. Um, it flows downstream into their marriage. Like, we are the chokehold of our own lives, right? And so if my worldview fundamentally doesn't change, right, and this is another reason why, certainly as I see it, a lot of coaching misses the mark, is because the second that I go away, you will revert back to however it was that you were before we were working together, because how you think fundamentally hasn't changed. The actions that, again, like downstream, like your behavior might have changed temporarily, like even some of the decisions I might argue could change, but your thinking and your worldview, that doesn't change. That, again, largely goes unexplored.
How does one then change their thinking and change their worldview?
So, great question. So the biggest problem for human beings, from an epistemic perspective, so in terms of how we make sense of reality, is self-deception. So it's not that the world out there is going to hurt me or deceive me in some way. It's that I am going to deceive myself and not even realize it, right? And so, for example, like I'm working with a particular client at the moment who has a lot of challenges, again, business owner, very quote unquote successful guy, etc. Has a lot of challenges around trusting people. Like, he's highly suspicious of people, very, very mindful about who he lets into his circle, and all that sort of stuff. And one of the things that I said to him is, I said, the problem for you in your life is not going to be, right, that you're going to let the wrong person in. The problem in your life is going to be that you never let the right people in. That's going to be the problem, it's, and so like, one of the things, what's another example? If I'm working with somebody who, for example, doesn't want to move into the social media space, let's say, for example, they've got a block around, like, I don't want to put myself on Instagram, I don't want to, do any of these things.
A lot.
It's too cringy.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's too cringy, it doesn't feel real, man, and all that sort of stuff, right? Right. And again, like, the biggest problem for them is not going to be that they're going to go out there and get sucked into the algorithm. That's not going to be the problem. The problem is going to be that they never do that, and then their business never, like, moves through a certain sort of threshold. So again, like, the thing that we should be more afraid, like, because I've also had this conversation when it comes to what's an example? Like, people who are in really successful, like, high level roles, but are also wanting to start their own business, right? Like, they might be going through that they might be sitting in that question. And of course, when we get into that question, the conversation around, like, yeah, but I need to be able to financially provide for my family. If I take this jump, this could, it could be a major, like, financial risk, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the questions that I'll sort of lay out is, I'll say, okay, let's play out two scenarios here. And because you're right to be nervous about these things. And I said, let's play out scenario A, right? So scenario A is, you do make this jump and all of your worst fears come true. You make poor financial decisions. It starts to cause problems within your own home. Maybe, your kids need to stop playing sport, like, for a couple of terms after school. Like, let's really play that out. You and your partner start arguing about money, like, oh, this wasn't the right decision. Like, let's really play that out. So that could happen, right? You will work through those things, and then on the other side of that, you'll be okay. You'll have your business. So that's scenario A, right? That could happen, right? Scenario B is that your kids grow up into their teens and early 20s, and they come to mum and they say to mum, Mum, I'm in this decision about what I want to do with my life. And you say to them, well, you should really back yourself and follow your purpose and all that sort of stuff. And they turn back to you and say, well, you did it, so why should I? And so it's like that could happen too. And so the question is, like, what scares you more? And invariably, like, indecision and staying as we are, often it's, because of homeostasis within our brain, we often don't weigh up the cost benefit analysis of staying where we are, because there's huge costs in staying where we are. It's like I think, I've been lucky in some ways to do a lot of podcasts, and people will sort of say, oh, if there was one thing you could leave the audience with, what would it be? And I always come back to that. It's like, the cost of staying where you are is way worse than the cost of doing something about it. And so that is a really, really good place to start. It is that there's four like hurdles to learning anything. So number one is that we need to see that there's something to learn. Number two is that we need to be willing to learn it. Number three is that we need to be capable of learning it. And then number four is we need to acknowledge a source of learning, as in like, where can I learn this, right? And give the appropriate authority to learn. And so a really, really good place to start, certainly as it pertains to that first barrier, is start seeing that there is something to learn here. Like you staying as you are, if you are fundamentally unhappy with where things are at, it will not quote unquote sort itself out. Like it happens through a decision. I think, you were sort of sharing that before. I think the etymology of the word decision, it comes from like desiderio, which means to cut off. It's like,
I
I'm
love
not going
that
to be doing that anymore.
Quick
Yeah.
side note, Max, I'm a word witch and I'm obsessed with words and the correct definitions and using them properly. So I appreciate from one nerd to another, that you are properly citing the proper use of the word. So anyway, but yes, we learn by doing, right? We absolutely learn by moving and not staying stuck.
One of the things we see over and over again with our clients, and we hear from the Clever Crew all the time, is, okay, so I have decided that I'm going to do this new thing. And this new thing is going to be done in front of people because that's the only way it can be done.
Right.
But I don't know how to deal with what people are going to say about me doing this new scary thing, because they're going to say, it's not me. I'm trying to be someone I'm not. Like, who do I think I am? All these things are coming up from outside sources. How do you prepare
Guide a
someone for
client.
that?
Yeah.
Well, I think, what's the expression? People don't want the best version of you. They want the version of you that best serves them. And I think that there's something very true about that. And again, I would come back to that might happen. Like again, like when we sort of speak about sort of the nature of coaching, I think, certainly as I see it, like I think it's important to play that out. It's like that could happen, but you also have the alternative that you live a life of never stepping into the space that you want to, at the mercy of people's opinions of you that best serve them.
Yeah.
And so like that's a lot scarier, and all of the systemic effects around how bitter you would become, what a bad example you would be for your kids, how it would impact you, even like your eating decisions around how you choose to comfort yourself with the food that you eat. Like there's all of these things that like play out, that certainly in my view, well, it doesn't matter what I think, but for what it's worth, certainly in my view, are far more frightening than, potential disapproval over here. But, part of the challenge for the human animal is that we are like communal animals. So, anywhere from tens to sort of hundreds of thousands of years, we lived in tribes. And so like significant disapproval from the tribe, is like very, very, is not miles away from guaranteed death. Because if you get chucked out, like you're in serious trouble. Part of the challenge with us around the whole, like, I just wish I didn't care what other people think about me, sort of that whole problem, is that we have now built like globalized communities, right? But we still have, in some ways, like now like dated biological wiring. And so when you're, if you're potentially worried about disapproval, all it sort of says to me is like you're just hanging out in the wrong tribe. Like there are tribes of people who like will support, whatever this is, and they're out there. It's your job to sort of curate that tribe. I actually think it's Quentin Tarantino who says, if you imagine your network is like a links in a chain, is like you want to always try and make sure that you're the weakest link in that chain. If you're the weakest link in your chain, you're hanging out with the right people.
So good. So true. Absolutely so true. Yeah, we hear that often where and Candace and I have played it out where, okay, and then they say that about you. And then what happens? Well, maybe it's awkward when I see them next time and when we get drinks. I'm like, should you be getting drinks with somebody who says that about you? And then it's like, well, I've known them for 10 years. Then who are you? When you let go of a friend, it's just root cause, right? And what it means about them and their identity and worldview, as you call it. There's always a root cause.
Agreed.
How does a person begin to recognize their own worldview? Because one of the things you said earlier was that you sometimes are unaware of your worldview. How do you begin to actually see it?
So one of the great ways one can recognize it is like in the outcomes one gets, because outcomes are downstream, right? So when you look at the outcome, like the question invariably took me years to be able to articulate this, but I actually, certainly as I see it in terms of my role, is I actually don't help people achieve goals, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So the thing about the nature of the human condition is that we fundamentally live in a sacrificial relationship with the future, right? So as in, I will give up something today so I can have something better tomorrow. And so the question invariably always surfaces within me is whenever somebody says, I want these outcomes, I haven't been able to generate them, can you help me? Is like, okay, how is it that you need to change so that these outcomes are inevitable, right? So rather than it being a strategic issue, right? Because again, like decisions and strategy and all behavior, all that stuff is downstream, right? So the thing that shows up for me is like, okay, how is it that you need to grow? How is it that you need to change? How is it that you need to develop into a person where these outcomes would be completely inevitable, right? And so one of the questions that I'm often sort of inviting clients into is like, what is it about me that is in some ways contributing to this being there? So one of the things, for example, I was in Mexico earlier this year, and I was running a workshop around like couples communication, right? Around how we can have more effective conversations within our marriages, right? And I was speaking about this idea of living in a sacrificial relationship with the future. And I said, right, raise your hand here. Who's here because they'd like to have a better marriage, whatever that means to you. Everyone put up their hand. And I said, right, what if I was to tell you that you can have a better marriage, but you have to give up the idea of being right? And I said, could you do that? I said, could you do that? Right? Because if you can have a better marriage, right? And if you can't, then that's probably why you're here in the first place. So this is the game that we're sort of in, right? Is like the game that we're sort of in is always around like, what do I need to give up in order to sort of have my goals? And so it's sort of, in my view, coaching tends to fall under like three categories. So in first you have what's called transactional coaching, which is sort of like the idea that you've got a goal, let's break that into smaller goals. I'll hold you accountable to them every week and we'll sort of go from there, right? It's like transactional work. Then the next level deeper is you have like skills-based coaching, which is like, okay, what are like the skills that need to get developed within you? Maybe it's negotiation or pitching or leadership management or whatever, right? So there's like a skill gap there that needs to get potentially filled. A lot of executive coaching is in that space. And then finally, the deepest level is transformational coaching, which is about like, rather than what do you need to do and what skills do you need to learn, like who is it that you need to become? And so a really good place for us to start looking at that is to start sitting in the question when you're looking at the outcomes that you're getting in your world, is to ask yourself the question, okay, like what is it about me that is in some ways contributing to this being there? Because if you can start to catch those things, you can start to catch on to your own worldview. It's very difficult, right? Because a worldview, like again, that piece before around like that disagreeable CEO that I was working with, who and I said, right, but not you. Like he's got a point, like in some ways, because like notice when I look out at the world, I can see that people are their own worst problem. But from my first person position, it doesn't look like I'm my worst problem. It looks like the world is my problem from my first person position. And so then when I look out at the world and I say, right, all of these people get in their own way in some way, what are the chances that I do the same? That in some ways gives me a place to start to be curious about those things.
Like it's deep, it's good. The three levels. I mean, Candace and I have seen it, and I think it's just so good. And Clever Crew, I hope you're going to be listening to this episode from repeat. Truly.
Getting back to our conversation, you've said that you don't give advice, you don't do accountability, and you've talked a little bit about the different types of coaching. So what does transformation look like when it's not specifically around goals or when it's not around strategy? What can your clients expect when they work with you?
Good question. So
Honestly, you're really helping me and Kat right now because this is what we're trying to explain to our clients over and over again. So
Truly, because
thank you
we're
for
in
this
between.
coaching session.
We're in between the skills and the transformational. We've never done transactional. Maybe we
Right.
did a little bit early on, but we're teeter
Right.
between the skills and the transformational, you know,
But
Yeah.
the transformational for me is harder to sell because they're like, wait,
it
but are
is.
you
Of
going to
course.
help me
'Cause
to get the leads? I'm like, yes, but not in the way you think.
I'm like, I'm
So
going to help
That's
you
funny.
become a whole new person. I'm going to be helping you
yeah,
become future you
it's
in
way
1 year
beyond
versus
that.
Yeah.
10 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
we
Yes.
So
know,
I
but
think, yeah.
So
So
coach
I
us
think, I
here.
think, well, I definitely think that, like, yeah, you will get those outcomes. And I think that that's important. Like, will I get more leads? Yeah, you will. Yeah, you will. But the problem, the challenge as I see it, is the whole, say, like with accountability, right? I need someone on being accountable. Is what it does is it sets up a dependency on the coaching engagement. Because the second that I get taken away, or external structures of accountability get taken away, it's sort of like the idea, like, oh, the only reason I go to the gym is because I don't want to let my PT down, you know. And it's like the healthiest people, certainly that I have uh, come into contact with, don't have to whip themselves to be healthy. They just are healthy, you know. Like, the default is to be healthy. And so, um, in terms of what to expect, you can expect that we're going to get the outcomes, right? But again, like, if you and I are going to work together, you have to acknowledge, right? So, like, one of the things that I always say whenever I'm in, like, a networking event, or, you know, people are so curious, is I go, okay, there's two insights that you need to have in order to work with me, right? Insight number one: do you have the capacity? Well, it's really three, but I'll walk you through. Insight number one: do you have the capacity to recognize that there is untapped potential within your business? And most business owners would go, yeah, I can see that we can do stuff better, and, you know, like, I want to grow the revenue or whatever. And I'd say, okay, great. Insight number two: do you have capacity? Do you have the capacity to recognize that you have untapped potential in yourself? Yes or no? And that's harder to see, right? Goes into the worldview. Like, most business owners, not most, but some might go, well, I don't know. I guess so. Like, I guess so. Um, and I'd say, right, okay, cool. Insight number three: can you see that these things are connected? Yes or no? Can you see that the untapped potential in yourself is in some ways leading to a chokehold in your business? Yes or no? Can you see that? And if you can answer yes to those three questions, we can do some work together. But if you can't, then I'm not the right person for you. Not yet, right? And so, yeah, not yet.
So
And
they
so
can
I
like
think
self-select out based on their own,
that's right.
their own
That's right.
answers,
Like, that's right. And
their
that's
own
what I mean.
readiness.
It's like,
Yeah.
that's what I mean around the word, right? Like, the word coach. It's like, I'll carry you, I'll hold you while you work out what you need to do for yourself. Yeah. Like, if I'm giving advice, I'm now no longer a coach. I'm a consultant. Yeah. And I'm not. Yeah. And so I will hold you while you negotiate with yourself. Yeah. And hopefully, if I can do my job well, is you can negotiate with yourself more effectively.
I love our podcast so much because I feel like I have a new friend. I feel like I've learned so much. I feel like, we're definitely going to talk again after this. And it's the first time we're ever meeting for the Clever Crew to know. And that's meaningful conversation is really everything. And if y'all are not making time and space in your life to have meaningful conversations with human beings, there's something wrong there. You got to take time to do this because it's enhanced my life so much to be able to talk to such cool people on our podcast. I know Kat would say the same.
And Clever Crew, Max reached out to us. He took the initiative and we said yes. And I'm so grateful that we did. So, like, it's just say yes, take a chance, even if you're an introvert. Max, Candace, and I are both strong introverts, which is why we have the podcast, because this is better than, a networking event or a conference of thousands of people.
Oh, yeah.
We get to skip the small talk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Straight into it.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So, Max, before we get to our not nice advice segment, although I feel like this entire episode has been not nice advice, but said with heart, which I appreciate, Is there anything you want to share in specifics about the book that you have coming out? I
Yeah.
saw a line about the book that said, you might be living a life that's not your own or written by somebody else. Like that was on your landing
Yeah.
page for it. And that, I know, so
Yeah,
Candace's
that's right.
eyebrows go up. That hit me. So what are the things you want the audience to know just about that that's in the works and coming soon?
Yeah, sure. So the book is in some ways it's an exploration around the crisis of meaning that we have in Western culture. So by and large, comparatively to the rest of the world, we don't have a survival problem. We have a meaning problem in that we find it difficult to create deep meaning in our lives. And so the book speaks, like the first couple of chapters of the book, it lays out one of the traps that we're in Western culture is what are called mimetic desires. So they're goals that you have inherited but are not actually yours. And so so one of the things that I sort of lay out early on in the book is when we look at how trade was done, like historically, it was largely done on the basis of utility. So, Kat, you have some eggs, I have some sheepskin. Why don't we swap? Because I need the eggs and you need the sheep. Post-industrial revolution, trade is now by and large done on the basis of identity. So we don't buy things. No, we no longer buy things for utility. We now buy things because of what it means about us to own them. And so one of the examples that I sort of lay out is say like with a Gucci scarf, right? Like a luxury item like that, is you purchase that item, but you don't purchase the item. You purchase what owning that item says about you for having it. So when you purchase that scarf, you're buying a story, right, of elegance, of sophistication, of success, right? And that's the thing that you buy. But the thing is that that scarf that I own, it says those things about me. But it only says those things about me until next year's scarf is released. Now, that same scarf that I own now no longer says elegance, sophistication, and success. It now says that I'm falling behind. And yet, it's the same scarf that I bought. And so, one of the challenges that we're in is we're in this game of making our buying decisions based on identity. But the problem is when we do that, we're buying a story, and that story is not fixed to the item. It leaps from thing to thing. And so because it leaps from thing to thing, we're constantly in pursuit of this story, right? That we can never really reach because there's always another thing that is sort of on its way. And so part of the challenge like is that I hope to be able to show the reader like through the process. And so by the way, like I speak in very sort of fancy language talking about, the crisis. It's written in a super conversational, like no nonsense way, just for whatever that's worth. But and so part of the like early stage of the book is I lay out like how we got here. So you think that you're pursuing these goals that are really yours, and the first sort of part of the book is actually to have the reader like track it in their experience, and there's like exercises and stuff that I have them go through where they can see it and they go like, oh wow, like okay, this is really like not my own. And so then we get into the question of like, what the F do you actually want, right? Which is like, okay, so you though, like the emphasis is on the word you. It's like, what do you really want? And so then we get into the question about like, okay, well, how do I design a life that is actually mine? Yeah, rather than it being something that I've inherited. And so the book sort of lays out the case that the way that we can orient ourselves in a secular, and secular just means like scientific, cold, rational, all those
Tangible,
things.
yeah.
The way that, right, all that stuff. The way that we can orient ourselves in the secular world is by finding a purpose that extends just beyond me and my needs. So what I mean by that is again, when we look throughout like the history of human beings, and we've come from anywhere from tens to hundreds of thousands of years of living in tribes, right, is your success, right, was predicated upon the contribution that you made to that tribe. Did you go and get the berries? Did you go and catch the fish? Did you go and hunt the animal? And if you did and you were successful, you could bring it back and you were celebrated within that tribe, right? Now, our tribe is no longer like my little corner of the forest. Like now, your tribe is the world, right? Because we live in like a globalized tribe in some sense. And so part of the challenge that we have is we have like an intrinsic biological wiring, which is geared around certain things: contribution, community, connection. Yeah. But we've built cultures or lives that herald the individual, right? It's all about me and what I want and what I need. And so part of what the book sort of lays out is it lays out how to find your purpose beyond yourself or your unique contribution to the world. And the deep irony is like one of the things I lay out is the deep irony is that when you find that and live into that, all of those things that I just spoke about by way of like success, status, stuff, none of that, all of that will just happen for you, but just as a natural byproduct of living into that, purpose. The deep irony is that you'll be more successful and probably make more money than you did before, but it won't mean the same things to you anymore. Now it will be like, what is it? Contribution is the cause and success is the symptom of that. And, and I just think that that's spot on. And part of the challenge, certainly as I've seen it when I've been working with clients who are in that question, is they think about like themselves first. So they go like, well, what do I want? Yeah. And that in some ways it sets us up for rather poor answers, because we're now getting these answers from a place within our own psychosomatic responses that is out of alignment with our own intrinsic nature. When we get our attention, like it's one of the most counterintuitive things in life. It's like, you want a better life? Stop thinking about you, and so certainly as I have seen it, by way of finding your purpose beyond you, is all of those things will just happen by default. And the book sort of talks about how to do that.
So one phrase that comes to mind that I say often is, I make the most amount of money when I'm not trying to make money. Like I make the most amount of money when I'm solving problems, connecting with people, collaborating. Yeah, it's counterintuitive hugely in this modern world, but
we often talk about like coming from a place of service. And I think when we do, and we serve with our own unique gifts in the way that makes the most sense to us, that's when we see the biggest success. And in this case, I'm talking about financial success, right?
Exactly. It just happens by default.
Mm-hmm. And we feel good about doing it. So look at, we're winning if we're doing that.
Exactly. And that, like one of the later chapters, like every chapter in the book is like a question. And one of the later chapters is called like, well, what's in it for me? And that's exactly what gets laid out, is like when you're living into that purpose and you can feel it, people they're going to want to work with you. They just will.
It's magnetic, because
that
the energy.
That shit is infectious. Exactly.
It is.
Yeah.
I always tell people that I'm a teacher at heart and I live for the light bulb moments. Like it doesn't even money. I know it's going to come, but what really brings me joy and lights me up is like seeing the light bulbs in my clients. I'm like, oh, I got to do that again. That was great. And like, give me more of that. Okay. We could talk to you forever, but we do have a 45-minute. Typically we try to keep our clever crew in and out so they can, listen to us while they're working out and then be done. So the Not Nice Advice segment, I'm going to read you a question that one of our clever crew wrote in. So it says, I'm passionate about my business and I have so much I want to accomplish. I have lots of ideas, but I'm stuck in this loop of starting, second guessing, and then starting over. How do I figure out what's actually worth pursuing? And how do I stay focused long enough to see something through? This is from Mentally Booked and Busy.
Okay. All right. I'll do everything I can to keep this on the shorter side. Okay. So number one is recognize that you are going to die one day, and that day is not far away. So like you do not have long.
Yeah,
you do not. Yeah,
the
you
story
do not
ends
have long,
the same,
right? So exactly. So number one is like, there is no safe path, because the safe path and the unsafe path end up in the same place, right? And you will be forgotten, and that's okay, right? And so the first thing is to actually start to grasp.
Not nice advice, y'all.
Seriously.
Yeah. Well, like
we asked for it.
Yeah. But the thing is like that's actually very freeing, because there's nothing real at stake. There's nothing real on the line, because the game ends the same way for everybody. So the first thing that I'd say is like start to grasp that you don't have an infinite amount of time. Number two is there's a sort of like formula that I tend to have people look at when it comes to like finding the thing, whatever the thing is, right? And number one is like start with your gifts. So, but I have a different appreciation of what that word means. I actually argue that your gifts are not for you. They come through you, but they're actually supposed to be for somebody else. And so if you think about all of the things that come easily to you, the problem with gifts is that we often dismiss them. And so if you look at, and so that's the first approximation is about you. The second approximation is, or the second piece of that equation is look at, okay, I have these gifts. Who in the world can I serve with these gifts, right? And then you work out who you want to serve. So who moves you the most to serve, right? And if we use business speak, that's like find your niche and all that sort of stuff, right? So it's like, and then the third is you need a place to start. So don't wait for the perfect plan. And the thing also shows up for me that entrepreneurs fall into a lot is entrepreneurs, like the first dollar that you make doing the new thing is like the best dollar ever. But immediately you sort of need to forget that, because after that, then you're really on the pursuit of mastery. There's like here's a great book for your reader to read. There's a great book called Mastery. It's by George Leonard. And there's 4 different archetypes of people who pursue anything, right? Or are trying to pursue mastery in any space. And the first 3 all quit in the end, right? And so the first is what's called the dabbler. This might be the person who submitted the question, right? So, and the dabbler, and you can tell, by the way, what archetype somebody is by how they handle what's called the plateau. So the plateau is when you're putting in a lot of effort, but you're not seeing any returns, right? And so the dabbler, what happens is they start something new, they experience that first bit of progress, but when they hit that plateau, they then seek the next thing to do. And so what ends up happening is then they start something new, they experience that first bit of progress, and then they hit that plateau, and then they just go round and round. The second is what's called the plotter. And the plotter is someone who hits that first bit of progress, hits that plateau, but never really applies themselves on the plateau, and eventually just sort of gives up. The third is what's called the obsessive, and that was me, right? The obsessive is like someone who will do anything to shorten that plateau. They'll do extra sessions after class. They get obsessed with it because they can't stand the emotional labor, and they're not willing to accept that the plateau is the plateau, and you just have to go along with it, right? And then and they end up sort of self-destructing. And then the fourth is the master, and the master is the archetype of person who actually understands this process. And actually, you think of like a martial arts master who does 10,000 kicks, the same kick 10,000 times every morning, from 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. or whatever. Is like the master understands this process and actually enjoys the plateau, right? And so that would be like, that's a really good resource for your potential listener.
Well, you gave us so much to think about today, and we truly, truly appreciate your time today, Max. We are dropping all of Max's information inside the show notes, so definitely click and reach out to Max. Thanks for joining us on Not Nice, Clever.
Remember to follow Not Nice, Clever wherever you listen to audio.
And if you haven't already, drop that 5-star review.
Share your takeaways. Tell us your story. We love to hear it.
Signing off, your not so nice, but oh so clever besties that mean business.
See you soon.